In the heart of a bustling city, one man's simple morning routine turns into an unexpected encounter that would shake the community and reveal the profound gaps in understanding and justice that still exist. Andre Carter, a respected attorney and advocate, thought he knew how to navigate life's challenges, until one day he was wrongfully accused by two police officers who had no idea of the man they had in front of them. What happened next? How did one moment change lives and set a whole community on a path to justice and change? Stay with us to uncover the story of resilience, realization, and the power of standing up for what's right. If stories like these inspire you, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts. The city streets were bustling as usual under the soft light of early morning. Andre Carter, a tall, poised man in his mid-30s, walked at a steady pace through the heart of the city. He moved with a calm and easy confidence, his dark suit perfectly pressed, his polished shoes clicking softly against the pavement. Though Andre wasn't someone who sought attention, his dignified presence turned a few heads as he walked by, his eyes focused, a faint, friendly smile resting on his face. Andre had started his day at a nearby diner, a cozy spot he visited regularly. The staff knew him by name and made sure to get his order just right: scrambled eggs, turkey bacon, and a side of fresh fruit. It was a comforting routine he enjoyed on mornings when he didn't have an early court appearance. He had just finished his breakfast, exchanged pleasantries with the owner, and stepped out onto the sidewalk, ready to take on the day. As he walked, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Smiling, he pulled it out to see a message from his mother. "Don't forget dinner tonight, looking forward to it." Andre typed back quickly, assuring her he wouldn't miss it. Family meant the world to him, and he rarely let work come between him and those moments that mattered. As he approached his car, a sleek black sedan parked neatly by the curb, Andre noticed two police officers walking toward him. At first he thought nothing of it. Officers were a common sight in this part of town, but as they got closer, their gazes fixed on him in a way that felt unsettling. He felt a slight shift in the air. He recognized that look, sharp, guarded, as though they'd already decided he was up to something. Andre took a breath, reminding himself of the advice his father had given him years ago. Stay calm, be respectful, and never give anyone a reason to question you. It was advice he'd had to follow more times than he cared to remember. As a black man, he was no stranger to the assumptions people made based on appearance alone. "Excuse me, sir," one of the officers called out as they came closer. Andre noted the name badge, Taylor. The other officer, Rogers, stood slightly behind, his hand resting near his holster. "Yes, officer," Andre replied, keeping his tone respectful and calm, though he felt the growing tension between them. "Can I see some ID?" Taylor asked, his voice carrying an edge of impatience. Andre raised his brows slightly, taken aback by the bluntness of the request. He hadn't been given any reason for the stop, and though he had been through encounters like this before, this one felt different. There was a hardness in Taylor's expression that made Andre's instincts prick up. "May I ask why, officer?" Andre replied, keeping his voice steady. He had done nothing wrong, and he knew his rights, but he also knew that his every word would be carefully scrutinized. "Just show us your ID, sir. It's a simple request," Taylor replied, his eyes narrowing. Andre held his gaze for a moment before slowly reaching into his pocket. He could feel Officer Rogers shifting behind Taylor, as though preparing for something. He handed over his driver's license, staying calm, though his heart beat just a bit faster. Taylor studied the ID, his face expressionless. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he asked in a tone that hinted at suspicion rather than mere curiosity. "I'm just heading to my car," Andre replied truthfully, keeping his expression neutral. "Is there a problem, officer?" Taylor ignored his question and instead asked, "Where are you coming from?" Andre answered simply, "I had breakfast at the diner down the street. Like I said, I'm just here to get to my car and head to work." Taylor's eyes narrowed. "What kind of work do you do?" "I'm an attorney," Andre replied, keeping his tone even. "I have a meeting soon, so if there's nothing else, I'd like to be on my way." The revelation seemed to catch Taylor off guard, but only for a second. He quickly masked his surprise with a skeptical smirk. An attorney, huh? You don't say. Rogers, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. You sure you're not hiding anything in that fancy car of yours? Andre felt the tension around him deepen. He knew how easily situations like this could escalate. He had to stay calm, not give them any reason to twist his words or actions. There's nothing illegal in my car, Andre said calmly. You're welcome to check, but I'd prefer if you didn't waste your time. I'm just trying to get to work. Taylor's eyes turned cold. You don't get to decide how we do our job. Step away from the car. Andre hesitated, feeling the heat of anger rising but knowing he had to keep it in check. He raised his hand slightly, showing that he wasn't a threat, and took a step back, keeping his expression neutral. But without warning, Taylor grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back. Andre's face contorted in pain, and before he could protest, Rogers was there, forcing him down onto the ground. Hey, what are you doing? Andre managed, trying to keep his voice calm, but strained from the pain shooting through his shoulder. You're under arrest for resisting, Taylor said coldly, snapping the cuffs onto Andre's wrists. Andre's mind reeled. He had done nothing to resist, nothing to justify this treatment. He tried to stay calm, but the weight of injustice weighed heavily on him as he sat handcuffed on the ground, a crowd beginning to gather, their expressions a mix of concern and anger. The moment was tense as Andre Carter felt the cold weight of the handcuffs digging into his wrists. He winced, a sharp pain flaring in his shoulder from the rough handling by Officer Taylor. The quiet confidence he'd worn like a shield now sat buried beneath waves of frustration and humiliation. His calm composure was unshaken, though, even as his heart raced with both disbelief and anger. Behind him, murmurs rippled through the crowd that had begun to gather. Most were strangers, passerby who had paused to witness the unsettling scene. Andre saw an elderly woman watching from her balcony above, horror etched into her face as she called out, "He didn't do anything wrong!" A young couple who'd been walking their dog had stopped too. The man pulled out his phone, recording the scene with a furrowed brow. "This is just wrong," he muttered to his partner. Andre, aware of the phone recording, felt a sliver of hope. Perhaps he thought someone would see the truth in what was happening here. Maybe, just maybe, he could later use this evidence to bring justice to the situation. Taylor yanked him to his feet, tightening his grip as he directed Andre toward the waiting police car. The walk felt long, and every step Andre took was heavy with the eyes of the onlookers following him, their stares a blend of outrage, pity, and confusion. He kept his gaze forward, his expression calm, refusing to let fear show. He understood too well how easily it could be twisted against him. As Officer Rogers opened the back door of the squad car, Andre was guided inside and the door was slammed shut, cutting him off from the murmurs and cries of the crowd outside. He gazed out the window, meeting the concerned faces of those watching. Gathering his strength, he spoke in a voice that carried through the thin glass. "This isn't over." The words were meant as a promise, as much to himself as to anyone who could hear. Inside the car, Andre's mind raced with thoughts of what would come next. He replayed the events in his mind, knowing that he had given these officers no reason to arrest him. He had stayed calm, respectful, and composed, even as they had unjustly escalated the situation. He clenched his fists in frustration, his thoughts drifting to the lessons his father had taught him, to stand firm in his dignity, no matter the situation. Now, he'd need that resolve more than ever. The police station loomed in the distance as they pulled up to the curb, its gray walls casting an imposing shadow. Officer Taylor and Officer Rogers led Andre inside, where the stark fluorescent lights and cold atmosphere contrasted sharply with the vibrant energy of the streets outside. Officers moved about, some casting curious glances at Andre while others quickly looked away, their faces a mixture of suspicion and indifference. As they approached the booking area, Taylor barked out orders, leading Andre to a desk where a tired-looking officer sat behind a computer. Without looking up, the officer asked, "Name?" "Andre Carter," Taylor responded on his behalf, his tone dismissive. The officer typed the name into the system, pausing briefly as if something about it caught his attention, but he quickly moved on. He motioned for Taylor to take Andre to the fingerprinting station. Each step of the process felt surreal to Andre, who couldn't quite believe he was being treated like a criminal. After the fingerprinting, he was escorted to a cramped holding cell, its narrow bench and stale air a stark reminder of the reality he now faced. Taylor removed the handcuffs with a sharp tug, his expression twisted in a smirk. "Get comfortable," he sneered, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "You might be here a while." Andre held his gaze steady, refusing to be baited by the taunt. He took a seat on the bench, breathing deeply to calm himself. Taylor and Rogers exchanged glances as if silently congratulating each other on their work before they turned to leave. As Andre sat alone in the cell, he let his mind settle. He had done nothing wrong. The officers, however, were another story. He'd encountered similar prejudices throughout his life. But this was different. This was an abuse of power, a baseless arrest carried out by officers who seemed to have already decided his guilt the moment they saw him. Outside his cell, the police station buzzed with activity, the hum of voices and phones echoing down the corridor. But Andre's mind was elsewhere. He was already thinking about how he could fight this, how he would hold these officers accountable for their actions. He was aware of his rights, and he was determined not to let this go quietly. Meanwhile, Officer Taylor and Officer Rogers returned to the front desk, their faces smug with a sense of accomplishment. As they stood discussing the arrest, a younger officer, Stevens, approached them. His eyes flicked to the cell where Andre sat and then back to the two officers, a glimmer of concern on his face. "Is everything all right?" Stevens asked, keeping his voice low. Taylor shrugged dismissively. "Just another troublemaker." Stevens hesitated, studying their faces. "You do realize who that is, right? That's Andre Carter, civil rights attorney? He's been involved in some big cases." Taylor's expression faltered briefly, but he quickly recovered, brushing off the comment with a scoff. "Just another lawyer with a fancy suit. We did our job, Stevens." But as Stevens walked away, the seed of doubt was already planted in Taylor's mind. Inside the quiet, cold walls of the police station, Lieutenant Sarah Grant had just returned from a long night shift, hoping to catch up on paperwork before heading home. As she walked through the station, she noticed an unusual buzz among her officers, particularly around Officers Taylor and Rogers, who were quietly celebrating their latest arrest. "Who's the new detainee?" Sarah asked Taylor, catching his smug grin. "Oh, just a guy named Andre Carter," Taylor replied, brushing it off. "Caught him in a well-to-do neighborhood, acting suspiciously." Something in Taylor's dismissive tone made Sarah's brow furrow. She knew that look on Taylor's face, and it usually meant he felt he had the upper hand. But it wasn't just any name he had mentioned. Andre Carter was familiar to her. She had read about him in legal journals, and his face had appeared on local news numerous times. Andre Carter wasn't just a name. He was a powerful civil rights attorney with an impeccable record for exposing corruption, often putting himself at odds with law enforcement agencies. "Wait," Sarah said slowly, her mind racing. "Andre Carter, the civil rights attorney?" Taylor's smile slipped for a split second, and Rogers stiffened beside him. Well, maybe," Taylor stammered, trying to recover. "We didn't know that when we detained him." Sarah felt a rush of disbelief. This was no ordinary arrest. They had taken in someone with significant influence, and a wrongful arrest of this nature could mean far-reaching consequences, not just for Taylor and Rogers, but for the entire department. Worse still, if Andre had been mistreated, it could reignite long-simmering tensions between the community and the police force. "We need to handle this carefully," Sarah muttered under her breath. She locked eyes with Taylor, her expression hardening. "Get me all the details on the arrest. Now." Taylor hesitated, attempting a weak protest. "Lieutenant, we followed protocol. He resisted, and we had reports of suspicious behavior in the area." Sarah held up a hand, cutting him off. "Get me the details." As Taylor handed her the report, Sarah scanned through it, catching the holes in the story. It was evident that Andre had cooperated, questioned their reasons for stopping him but never resisted. What's more, the vague description of suspicious behavior did little to justify his arrest. A sense of dread began to pool in her stomach. "Do you understand the implications of what you've done?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Taylor shrugged, feigning indifference. "He's just a lawyer. We're fine." Sarah's glare sharpened. This just a lawyer has taken down bigger cases than this entire department. He's a public figure and a respected legal force. If he chooses to file a lawsuit, he'll have more than enough to drag every one of us through the mud, especially if he was mistreated. A palpable unease settled over Taylor and Rogers as her words sunk in. Rogers shifted uncomfortably, finally beginning to grasp the gravity of their actions. Sarah turned away from the officers, pulling out her phone. She needed answers fast and someone she could trust. She dialed Officer Derek Marshall, a young cop she knew would do some digging without adding to the station's tense atmosphere. The line picked up and she kept her voice low. "Derek, I need you to look up Andre Carter's profile. I think we're dealing with someone a lot more significant than these guys realize." After hanging up, she took a deep breath, bracing herself for what was to come. She had been in the force long enough to know that arrests like these were rare but dangerous. They could shatter the trust of a community in a single moment. She knew she had to act quickly to prevent this from spiraling any further. Moments later, Marshall returned her call. "Lieutenant, it's worse than we thought. Carter isn't just a high-profile lawyer. He's been working with federal investigators, looking into cases of police corruption." Sarah's heart dropped. This arrest wasn't just a mistake. It was a monumental error that could have severe repercussions. "Thank you, Derek. I owe you one," she replied, hanging up. Turning back to Taylor and Rogers, Sarah's voice was steely. "You're going to write a full report on this arrest, every detail, every step, and I'll be personally reviewing it. And until I say otherwise, Carter is not to be moved or spoken to without my approval." As she approached the holding cell where Andre was waiting, Sarah felt the weight of what was at stake. They were no longer dealing with an ordinary arrest. They were facing a reckoning, one that might reshape not only the department but the community's trust in law enforcement. Lieutenant Sarah Grant took a deep breath as she stepped into the holding cell where Andre Carter sat, composed despite the harsh fluorescent lights and the tight confines of the cell. She'd read about Andre's work, his advocacy for justice, his track record of holding police accountable, and now more than ever she knew that this situation could not be brushed aside. "Mr. Carter," she began, her tone respectful yet steady, "I apologize for the circumstances. I want to make things right, but I need to hear from you first." Andre met her gaze with a measured calmness. "Lieutenant, I'm here because Officers Taylor and Rogers saw a black man in a wealthy neighborhood and assumed he was up to no good. I complied with every question, yet they escalated the situation." His words were blunt, and Sarah's face tightened as she listened. She'd long suspected that certain officers in her department were biased, but hearing it stated so directly, and in a situation that could cost them all, made it feel all too real. "I assure you, Mr. Carter, this is being taken very seriously," she replied, feeling the weight of each word. "I've ordered an immediate investigation into the conduct of Officers Taylor and Rogers, and their actions will not go unchecked." Andre looked at her for a long moment before nodding slightly as if weighing her sincerity. "Lieutenant, what your department does next will define not only the department's future, but the relationship with this community. I don't want an apology that just pacifies the public. I want accountability." Sarah absorbed his words, realizing that her own role as a leader was on the line. The community would look to her response as proof of whether the system could change or if it would always protect itself. The stakes had shifted from just an arrest gone wrong to a pivotal moment in her career and for the city itself. "Mr. Carter, I can't erase what's happened, but I can commit to full transparency in handling this." She took a step forward, her voice clear. "When this case reaches the public, they'll see that this department is prepared to own its mistakes. Taylor and Rogers will be held accountable, and new measures will be put in place to prevent situations like this from happening again." Andre's expression softened just slightly. "If that's true, then perhaps something positive can come from this." In that moment, Sarah felt a resolve solidify within her. She would push for real change regardless of the resistance she knew it would bring. As she turned to leave, she offered one last word of assurance. "This is just the beginning, Mr. Carter. Justice will be served." As she exited the cell, Lieutenant Grant felt the weight of her commitment. The steps she would take next would ripple beyond her department, and she was ready to meet the challenge head-on. Lieutenant Sarah Grant could feel the mounting tension the moment she stepped back into the main hall of the station. The air was thick with unease as officers moved through their routines with quiet urgency, knowing that this situation was spiraling into something much larger than any of them had anticipated. Reports of Andre Carter's wrongful arrest had already reached the press, and a crowd of protesters gathered outside the station, demanding answers. Placards bearing messages like "Justice for All" and "End Racial Profiling" waved high above a diverse group of community members united in their outrage. Sarah knew that these weren't just onlookers, they were people calling for change, demanding accountability. As Sarah made her way to Chief Brooks' office, she passed Officers Taylor and Rogers, both looking increasingly uneasy. She shot them a hard look, a silent reminder of the accountability she had promised Andre. In the chief's office, Sarah found Brooks pacing, his face a mask of frustration. He paused when he saw her, his jaw clenched as he weighed the gravity of the situation. "Lieutenant Grant, we're in a mess," he said, gesturing toward the window where the noise of the crowd outside could be heard, even through the thick walls. "This has gone beyond a simple misunderstanding. The media is here, the mayor's office is calling, and the community is rallying." Sarah took a steadying breath, knowing that the only way to prevent further damage was to approach the situation transparently. "Chief, the public won't accept silence, and neither will I. This incident was preventable. Officers Taylor and Rogers acted without cause, and their behavior is under investigation." The chief looked momentarily taken aback but nodded slowly, understanding that the situation required more than just damage control. "So what do you suggest, Sarah? An apology and a promise to do better?" "Not just that," Sarah said firmly, her eyes holding his. "A public acknowledgement, immediate suspension of the officers involved, and a commitment to an internal review. We need to show the community that we're serious about change." Brooks sighed, but there was a glimmer of understanding in his gaze. He knew Sarah was right. The path forward was no longer about protecting the department's image, but about preserving the department's relationship with the community it served. "Fine," he agreed, his voice resigned but resolute. "Prepare a statement. We'll go out there and face them together." Moments later, standing beside Chief Brooks in front of the station, Sarah scanned the crowd, catching a glimpse of Andre among them, his face calm but resolute. She could feel the weight of his gaze, a reminder that this wasn't just about one person's experience but about the collective call for justice. As the chief began his statement, Sarah knew that this crisis had become more than just a moment of reckoning for the department. It was the beginning of a turning point, a chance to reshape the culture of accountability, one step at a time. Inside the police station, a quiet but palpable tension filled the air. Lieutenant Sarah Grant walked briskly down the corridor, her mind racing. The more she uncovered about Andre Carter, the clearer it became that they had made a serious mistake, a mistake with far-reaching consequences. As Sarah reached her office, she closed the door behind her and took a steadying breath before sitting at her desk. She opened her laptop and pulled up a background check on Andre Carter, hoping to find more about him that might shed light on his quiet but commanding presence. To her surprise, as she sifted through his records, she discovered that Andre wasn't just a successful attorney. He was a civil rights lawyer with a formidable reputation, known for representing cases against police misconduct. Sarah's heart pounded as she continued reading. Andre's work extended beyond courtroom victories. He had been an integral part of investigations into police corruption in multiple cities. Just a year prior, he had helped uncover a major scandal in another state, which had led to significant reforms and the removal of several high-ranking officers. Andre Carter wasn't just any lawyer. He was someone who had made a career out of standing up against systemic injustice. The gravity of the situation weighed on her as she processed the information. She realized that officers Taylor and Rogers had no idea who they were dealing with when they chose to target Andre. But now the stakes were higher than any of them had anticipated. Andre Carter had the power, influence, and reputation to bring serious repercussions to the department if he chose to pursue this. A knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. Officer Stevens, one of the newer recruits, entered, his expression concerned. "Lieutenant, the situation outside is getting more intense," he reported. "People are chanting for justice, and it's making everyone on edge." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. She knew she had to act swiftly. "Thank you, Stevens. We need to handle this carefully." She stood, her resolve solidifying. "Have Officers Taylor and Rogers been briefed about the severity of this situation?" Stevens looked uneasy. "Not yet, Lieutenant. I don't think they realize just who they've brought in." "Let's make sure they do," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "Gather them in the conference room. They need to know the truth, and they need to understand the consequences of their actions." Minutes later, Taylor and Rogers sat in the small, unadorned conference room, shifting uncomfortably as Sarah entered and closed the door behind her. The silence in the room was thick as she looked each of them in the eye, her gaze unyielding. "Officers, it's come to my attention that you've severely mishandled this case," she began, her voice firm. "Andre Carter is not some random individual. He's a respected civil rights attorney, and his history speaks volumes. By unjustly arresting him, you've not only made an error in judgment, but have endangered the credibility of this entire department." Taylor's face paled, and Rogers looked down at his hands, seemingly grasping the seriousness of the situation for the first time. "Lieutenant, we didn't know who he was," Taylor stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Exactly," Sarah replied sharply. "And that's the problem. This department's culture of assumptions and biases led to you detaining an innocent man without cause. That man just happens to be one of the most prominent figures fighting against police misconduct. Do you understand what this could mean for us?" Rogers opened his mouth as if to respond, but quickly shut it, realizing he had no defense. The silence that followed was filled with a mixture of tension and regret. After a long pause, Taylor finally spoke. What do we do now, Lieutenant?" Sarah took a deep breath, searching their faces for any sign of genuine remorse. "For starters, both of you are being suspended pending a full investigation. This is not negotiable," she said. "And after the investigation, you'll face disciplinary action based on the findings." Taylor and Rogers exchanged nervous glances, the weight of the consequences settling in. But Sarah wasn't done. "We need to do more than just react internally. I'm taking this to Chief Brooks, and we'll be issuing a public statement. We will take accountability, not just to protect the department's reputation, but to make it clear that we are committed to serving our community fairly and justly. This department will stand for integrity, or it will fall." Leaving them in stunned silence, Sarah walked out of the conference room and made her way to the chief's office. She understood that this was only the beginning of the fallout from Andre's wrongful arrest. But for the first time, she felt certain that exposing the truth was the only way forward. As she reached Chief Brooks' office, she steeled herself, ready to stand up for what was right and set a new standard within the department. This incident had uncovered deep-seated issues within their ranks, and if they were to regain the trust of their community, they would need to confront those issues head-on. The truth was out now, and it was time for the department to face it. A tense quiet settled over the police station as word spread that a public statement was imminent. Outside, the crowd had swelled in number and in voice, chanting for justice and accountability. Lieutenant Sarah Grant took a deep breath as she stood near the entrance, waiting for Chief Brooks. She had briefed him on the situation, providing him with a detailed rundown of Andre Carter's background and the implications of the wrongful arrest. Chief Brooks appeared in the hallway looking tired but resolute. His usually stern face held an uncharacteristic tension. He nodded at Sarah and spoke quietly. "Are we ready?" "Yes, Chief," Sarah replied. "But this has to be more than words. This apology needs to demonstrate a commitment to real change. The community has to know that we take this seriously." Chief Brooks gave her a somber look. "I know, Lieutenant. We can't afford empty promises this time. Let's get this right." As they stepped outside, the intensity of the crowd's energy hit them like a wave. Reporters jostled for position, cameras trained on the police station entrance. Chief Brooks took his place at the makeshift podium set up on the steps. He raised his hands and slowly the voices hushed, though the air remained charged with anger and anticipation. With a grave expression, Chief Brooks adjusted the microphone, and his voice came out steady, albeit weighed down by the gravity of the moment. "Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I want to start by saying that we are here to listen. I am here to listen. Today I'm here not just as chief, but as a representative of this entire department, a department that serves you." The crowd held its breath, waiting, their skepticism visible. Chief Brooks continued, "I'm here to address the recent wrongful arrest of Mr. Andre Carter, a civil rights attorney and dedicated community member. This incident should never have happened. The actions taken by Officers Taylor and Rogers were unjustified, and they reflect a failure of judgment. I am deeply sorry for the pain and frustration this has caused not only to Mr. Carter, but to every member of our community who values justice and fairness." And Andre stood at the back of the crowd, watching closely, his face a mask of calm but his eyes sharp, observing every word. Chief Brooks met his gaze for a brief moment before looking back over the crowd. "We know that this apology is overdue, and I know that mere words cannot erase the harm that has been done. I can only tell you that we are taking full responsibility, and we are making changes to ensure incidents like this never happen again." A murmur rippled through the crowd, mingling skepticism with cautious hope. People leaned forward, hanging on his words, waiting to see if this was truly different or just another hollow apology. "Effective immediately," Chief Brooks continued. "Officers Taylor and Rogers are suspended, pending a thorough investigation. We will review all the events that led up to Mr. Carter's wrongful detention, and will be conducting a department-wide reassessment of our policies and practices. I want to assure you all that this will be a transparent process, and we will work closely with community leaders, legal experts, and advocates to make sure our standards align with justice and respect for all." The tension in the crowd began to shift. Some people nodded, visibly relieved to hear about specific actions. Yet others watched, their faces skeptical, not yet ready to believe in words alone. Then, with a steady tone, Chief Brooks added, "We understand that there is a history of mistrust here. This incident is not isolated. It's part of a larger, systemic problem that has gone unaddressed for too long. That changes now. We will establish a community review board that will work alongside us, guiding us to prevent this type of behavior from happening in the future. The voices of this community will be central in every decision we make going forward." A woman in the crowd shouted, "How do we know you'll follow through this time?" Her voice carried a mixture of anger and exhaustion, mirroring the sentiments of many. Chief Brooks paused, meeting her gaze. "You have every right to question us, to doubt us," he said openly. "We've made mistakes that have hurt those we are meant to protect. All I can ask is that you hold us accountable. We will provide full transparency throughout this process, and you'll see every step we take toward change." At that, the crowd seemed to soften, a mixture of anger and acceptance hanging in the air. People were starting to listen, not fully convinced, but hopeful enough to give this apology a chance. After a pause, Chief Brooks motioned to Andre, inviting him forward. "Mr. Carter," he said, "if you're willing, I'd like to invite you to share a few words. Your voice matters in this conversation, and it's important for all of us to hear it." Andre stepped forward, his expression calm but resolute. He glanced briefly at Chief Brooks before addressing the crowd, his voice carrying a quiet power. "This is about more than just me," he began. "Yes, I was wrongfully arrested, and yes, this is personal. But I am here because I know I am not alone in this experience. What happened to me happens to far too many people in this community." Andre's gaze swept over the crowd, meeting eyes with individuals who looked back at him with expressions of solidarity and shared frustration. "I appreciate the chief's apology, and I accept it as a first step," he continued. "But it is only that, a first step. The promises made today must become actions, and those actions must become lasting change. We need real commitment, not just today, but tomorrow, and in the weeks and months to come. The crowd erupted into applause, and several voices called out words of support, reinforcing Andre's message. As the applause subsided, Andre took a deep breath and concluded, "Let this be the beginning of a true partnership between this community and the department. We deserve a system that respects and protects every individual, and together, I believe we can build it." With those words, he stepped back, giving Chief Brooks a final nod. Chief Brooks returned to the microphone, his tone humbled but resolved. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. We stand with you and the entire community in this mission for justice. We're ready to listen, and we're ready to act." As they turned to leave the podium, a new energy buzzed through the crowd, one of cautious optimism, a shared hope that perhaps this time things really would change. As the sun rose the day after the public apology, a renewed sense of purpose filled the air around the police station and within the community. Lieutenant Sarah Grant could feel it, a cautious optimism spreading as calls for accountability began to take form as actionable steps. She was determined to make sure that what had been promised in front of the public would become reality. The first step was implementing the Community Review Board. She worked with Chief Brooks, sitting down with local leaders, activists, and legal experts, including Andre Carter, to define the board's role and powers. This wasn't just for show. The board would have full authority to review cases of police misconduct and influence training protocols. Together, they set guidelines, emphasizing impartiality, transparency, and accountability. "I want this to be a foundation we can build on," Andre stated firmly as the committee drafted its charter. "If we're going to change anything, we need real oversight from the people this department serves." Chief Brooks nodded, acknowledging the weight of Andre's words. "We're with you on that. We'll make sure this board is fully empowered, and every case will be reviewed without exception." The next move was a full assessment of the department's policies, starting with officer training. For years, police training had been focused primarily on control and compliance, with minimal emphasis on de-escalation and cultural awareness. Sarah, who had long advocated for change from within, knew this was her opportunity to shift that dynamic. She proposed a training overhaul, introducing new methods for conflict resolution and de-escalation, and requiring every officer to participate in bias awareness workshops. At the first training session, the atmosphere was a mix of interest and resistance. Officer Taylor, one of the officers involved in Andre's arrest, was present, along with others who'd begun to feel the pressure to change. As the session unfolded, Andre Carter was invited to share his experiences and insights, providing the officers with a perspective they rarely had the chance to hear. He spoke with calm conviction, offering stories and examples that illustrated the deep-rooted issues the community had faced for years. "For some of you, this might feel uncomfortable," Andre said, looking across the room. "But growth doesn't happen in comfort. I stand here not as an adversary, but as someone who believes in what you could become. You have the power to rebuild this trust, to be part of something that people want to respect." Some officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but others listened with genuine engagement, nodding thoughtfully. The energy in the room shifted. It was clear that his words were making an impact. Meanwhile, the new Community Review Board began its work with vigor, reviewing previous cases, documenting patterns, and even identifying training gaps. Sarah, who worked closely with the board, was struck by their thoroughness and dedication. Each report they produced highlighted ways to strengthen the department's accountability to its community. Their findings, no longer concealed, were shared transparently with the public. This transparency had a remarkable effect. Community members felt heard, seen, and respected for the first time in years. Calls to the station gradually transformed from complaints to questions about how they could get involved. Block by block, street by street, community forums and open dialogues took place, allowing the residents to speak directly with officers about their concerns and hopes for the neighborhood. What once felt like a sharp divide between the police and the community now felt like a bridge in progress. Months passed and the changes continued. The department started to see an increase in applicants who wanted to serve their community responsibly and with empathy. Young people who once feared the badge now saw an opportunity to redefine what it meant. Andre, who became a visible force within the Community Review Board, was heartened by the progress. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but with each small victory, his confidence in lasting change grew stronger. Lieutenant Grant looked back on the journey, her commitment to change stronger than ever. She knew there would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but she felt a renewed purpose. In her heart, she recognized the power of taking small, consistent steps towards a more just, compassionate future. As she closed out a meeting with the Community Review Board, she looked around at the faces of her fellow officers, board members, and Andre Carter. "We're just beginning," she said. "But this is the foundation of something meaningful, something we can be proud of." Andre nodded, a small but genuine smile on his face. "One step at a time," he replied. "Justice isn't a destination. It's a journey." And so, with each day, they took those steps, slowly but surely transforming a broken system into one that reflected the values of justice, respect, and unity they all held dear. Months after the incident that shook the community, the city felt transformed. Andre Carter, who once stood as the face of the community's outrage, now symbolized something different, a quiet yet unyielding force for meaningful change. Where there had once been tension and resentment, a sense of collaboration and trust was slowly taking root. The police department had been reshaped in ways that many had once deemed impossible, and the community felt it in every interaction, every meeting, and every shared smile between neighbors and officers. Lieutenant Sarah Grant was determined to maintain the momentum they had built. Working with the Community Review Board, she'd seen the transformation unfold firsthand. Gone were the days when citizens viewed the station as an enemy stronghold. Now officers walked through the neighborhood not as strangers but as familiar faces, welcomed with nods, waves, and even friendly conversations. One morning, as Sarah was going over some reports in her office, she received a message from Chief Brooks. "Meet me in the community center. I think you'll want to be here," it read. Curious, she made her way over, thinking it was likely another community forum or a follow-up with the review board. But as she entered, she was surprised to find a crowd gathered, and at the center of it all was Andre, speaking to a group of high school students. "Every one of us has the power to make an impact, big or small," Andre said, addressing the room with a warmth and confidence that captivated everyone listening. "Whether you're wearing a badge or simply walking through life, the change we create is built on how we treat each other." The young people in the room hung on his words, asking questions about his journey, about justice, and about what they could do to make a difference. Sarah watched in admiration as Andre answered them with humility and empathy, each word building a bridge between their past and the hopeful future they were working to create. One student, a young girl named Alana, stood up and shared her thoughts. "Before all this, I didn't think people could actually change the system, but seeing what you've done, Mr. Carter, it makes me believe it's possible." Her voice wavered, but her determination shone through. "Thank you for fighting, and for showing us that it's worth it." Andre smiled, visibly moved. "The fight isn't over, Alana, but every day we're a little closer, and it's going to take all of us, you, me, Lieutenant Grant here, to keep moving forward." Sarah felt a wave of pride, realizing just how deeply the work they'd done together had resonated. This wasn't just about preventing another wrongful arrest or making sure the police followed new procedures. It was about reshaping a community's understanding of what justice, respect, and humanity could look like when everyone worked together. As the students left, many of them took turns shaking Andre's hand, each one thanking him. And as Sarah observed the genuine connections formed in the room, she understood that this was the real legacy of their efforts, instilling belief in a future where young people like Alana could feel empowered to shape the world around them. Once the room cleared, Chief Brooks approached, offering a nod of appreciation to both Sarah and Andre. "This is the impact we were hoping for," he said quietly, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "A true change that lasts beyond our time." Andre turned to Sarah, his gaze steady but full of gratitude. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I didn't think I'd say this, but Working with you has restored my faith in what we can accomplish together." Sarah smiled. "We still have work to do, but seeing this today, I know we're on the right path." Together, they left the community center feeling the magnitude of what they had achieved. Walking out into the sunlight, they saw neighborhood kids playing in the park, families chatting on benches, and officers like Stevens greeting community members with genuine warmth. These were the subtle signs of change that meant everything, the lasting impact of courage, commitment, and unity. As we wrap up this journey, let's remember the power we all have to make a difference. In every community, every conversation, and every choice, we create a ripple that can shape the future. When we come together with respect, integrity, and empathy, we build not only stronger relationships but a better world for everyone. Thank you for watching, and if this story moved you, please hit the subscribe button. Join us as we continue sharing stories of resilience, transformation, and hope. Your support helps spread messages that can make a real impact. Let's keep building a world where justice and compassion are at the heart of every community.